Welcome to Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. This podcast is about the journey to a more sustainable future in order for us to be able to do our bit to achieve net zero. I'll be discussing a variety of topics with experts in their field in order to educate and increase our knowledge of clean energy, electric vehicles and the electric vehicle infrastructure. So whether you're an individual wanting to make a difference at home, a small business or a corporate, this podcast is just for you. On today's podcast, I have the wonderful, and I have to say wonderful, Carol Deveney from Sea Change International. She's the MD, the Managing Director of Sea Change, and she happens to be my mentor as well. So thank you, Carol. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. It's really lovely to see you.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Liz.
I know. We just have known each other for, is it about a year now? It's been a little while, hasn't it? But yeah, you've been an absolute star. So just to let everybody know, so Carol was has been wonderful to me, and actually asked me to speak at Project Controls Expo at Wembley Stadium it was November, wasn't it?
November, yeah.
22. My God, it does seem ages ago, but that was quite hairy. It was just, I was quite nervous about that, I have to say, and I hadn't been to Wembley Stadium since I saw Bon Jovi in the 1990 something or other.
Well, you were fabulous. Your nerves didn't show.
Oh, that's because I was swatting up in the car on the way down. I was like, right, okay. I was talking myself through what I was supposed to be saying. But listen, thank you for joining me. Now, I just wanted to say, so for everybody to understand this, so Carol has worked in major infrastructure change, kind of rail infrastructure especially, haven't you, for many years? So just give everybody a little bit of background about what you do, what your role entails at Sea Change.
So I founded Sea Change when I left working in big corporate organisations who would essentially run huge portfolios of major projects. And I specialised in major projects, mostly major transport projects, and mostly on the commercial and sponsorship side. So the sponsor is the person that makes sure there's funding in place, makes sure the benefits are delivered, aligns all the stakeholders, checks everything's in corporate governance, and makes sure that the project team are given proper instructions and supported while they're doing it. So that was my job in major organisations. A lot of the time I was going out looking to buy resources to help us do that in-house, and very rarely could we find them, and we'd end up building it in-house. So when I left, I knew that the thing I was going to do was go and create in the market the thing I was always trying to buy that didn't exist. So Sea Change is essentially a specialist, we're a boutique consultancy for organisations who deliver major projects that have sponsors in their organisation. So we still do a lot in transport. We do heavy rail, light rail, subsurface, all sustainable transport. Essentially everything we do is about sustainable transport, and we work in some other parts of the infrastructure world as well, helping some other people do. I say we always work on legacy projects, so everything we work on is because it's building an infrastructure legacy in a positive way. So that's essentially what we do.
What size projects are they then?
So we can be working on anything from, probably the smallest project we're working on is in the sort of low millions, up to projects that are into the multi-billions. I'm used to managing and looking at portfolios in the sort of 30, 40, 50 up to $80 billion, depending on which side of the world we're on. That kind of scale. But in reality, sometimes we're in working with smaller organisations that have big challenges that are high risk rather than necessarily high levels of volume and their cost for major projects, because sometimes change in a big organisation's got so much cost risk associated with it that we're in helping them with their organisational development and training and implementation around that.
And when we were at Project Controls Expo, you were specifically talking about some of the projects, the sustainability projects that you've been working in. Can you just kind of explain a little bit about those specific ones that you were talking about?
Yeah, so I think at Project Con I would have been talking about mostly the rail projects, because rail's such a big growth sector at the moment in the world in terms of projects, and ProjectCon, as you know, has got a very international audience. People come from all over the world to be at the London ProjectCon at Wembley. There are ProjectCons in other countries now, but that's a huge international audience. And projects are often international. A lot of us in that community, we move where the projects are. We don't get to just have them all built in our hometown. We tend to go where they are. And I certainly started doing major rail projects in my home country, not hometown, and those were some of the ones I was talking about. So the Airdrie Bathgate Railway reopening, Borders Railway reopening, they're significant infrastructure projects. I think I was using some of the examples as well of some of the Canadian stuff that we've worked on. So in Toronto, where it's major upgrades to existing railway and new rail as well, and they are. It used to be when I started working in rail, and the reason I was using these examples is those were early examples from my career where if you were going out and building 16 miles of new rail and 7 new stations, that was enough. That was enough of a sustainable agenda. And obviously we were doing that in compliance with all the environmental legislation. In fact, a lot of us had a very strong environmental and sustainable feel, so we were actually trying to go beyond compliance and into what does best practice look like. So not just relocating habitats and not just creating where we're taking away trees, putting one back, but actually saying how can we do a bit more, how could we actually improve the environment as we do these works. But there wasn't a big push to do that because creating sustainable transport was seen as being enough. If I fast forward to now and the projects that we're advising on now, so we work on UK rail projects still, we're major partners in writing something called Better Value Rail, which is all about the future of rail projects. We're involved with East West Rail and a lot of overseas projects. We are never advising on compliance. Compliance is just a given now. We're now much more looking at actually how does your sustainability go way beyond, so into the communities, into the legacy, into the socio-economic sustainability. So it's a much broader pool. But those early examples were very much seen at the time as we were going over and above, and we had to convince funders that was a good thing because compliance is enough. So it was actually on us to say, this is why we should do a bit more, guys, because people really value this in their communities. So those were the early examples, were the big, what we call the Rail Renaissance projects in Scotland.
So how's it kind of, so from the early days then, how has it changed? How has the sustainability agenda in these big infrastructure projects, how has it changed in your eyes then? What differences have you actually seen?
So the difference, one of the main differences I've seen is in people's cultural acceptance of it. So it used to be people would say things like, oh, I can't believe we have to do ecological surveys. That's going to import delay into the project. So everyone would be hoping that we didn't find anything particularly sensitive. Now, I have to tell you that great crested newts are a great headline. Great crested newts are a protected species. 80% of great crested newts live in Scotland. And where do you think, if you were a great crested newt, you would go and live? You would go and live in a place that is quiet, that has the right environment for you, and all the right things for you to eat, drink and live and flourish. That happens to be closed down railway lines.
Oh my God, does it?
It's a great, I'll tell you, if you ever meet a great crested newt looking for a home, send them there. So we know that by going and doing these projects, it's a certainty that you're going to find them somewhere. So it used to be people would be like, oh, I can't believe we're going to find newts. Oh, I can't believe there'll be badgers there. It was all as if we were reacting as if this was a problem, and you would go to the client, oh, well, the whole programme's blown because we found, turns out if you go into the wilderness and start tearing it up, there are animals living there. And
funny that, isn't it?
It's such a shock. And that's the way it was sort of seen in terms of scheduling and cost. And that's complete. I don't really hear that now in projects. I hear people now completely embrace it as it's part of the project. It's just like if we go back to the times of my ancestors who would have been physically building railways, so they would have come from Ireland to physically dig the railways as navvies. It wasn't unacceptable in those days when the railways were being built to lose a man a mile. Now, I'm saying a man knowing that that's gendered language because it was men. There were almost no women doing that work. And a man a mile was not seen as particularly problematic. If one person dies every mile, kind of the cost of building the infrastructure. Now, that we would not find that acceptable at all now. You know, that, and people now just take health and safety legislation as being a given, and that's what's happened in the evolution of environmental legislation and compliance and sustainability. People now just see it as a given. They're like, oh yeah, we're not going to go out and crush all the small creatures that we find. And it's not just about ecology, that's just one people get. You know, people accept that there's a level of noise we can't expect people to tolerate in their homes while we build alongside them, and that's about good sustainable practice. People accept that we can't pollute water courses and be like, well, it's the cost of getting the infrastructure. So we've got away from this, you know, the greater good justifies all the behaviour on the way up to it. And that for me is like that beautiful evolution of environmental practice in the infrastructure sector. I'm not saying it's everywhere, just as, you know, it's not everywhere that the health and safety is a given. There are places that will still sacrifice people for cost and time. But the evolution is definitely there, and it's on the right journey. So people wouldn't dream now of saying, could we do away with some of that environmental stuff to save money? Because they know it's not going to happen, but it's also terrible business. You know, being really sustainable actually makes your project save money. You know, if you treat your waste in a way that you reduce it in the first place, and you know this from the continuous improvement perspective, reducing waste is always a money saver. Because waste is a money leak, so it's people start to see the virtue as well as the financial reward. They really start to get it and buy into it.
And it's funny you should say that, isn't it? You know, people don't recognise how to deal with the waste in the processes, or actually what they're doing in the first place. Yeah, you know it, and actually, do you know what? There's probably loads of people who are listening or watching to this who think, what the hell's, you know, change management, or what the heck's, sorry, I swore then, didn't I? Or what the heck's continuous improvement? They don't know, but it is about looking at things in a different way, isn't it? With a different lens.
Absolutely, yep. And I have this saying that I say all the time, which is that you'll find that if you embrace, you know, sustainable practice and the environment, it's good business as well as good practice.
Yeah. And do you remember when we were at Project Con, there was a guy there from New Zealand, wasn't there? That came. Do you remember? He was sat in the session, and he was talking about the fantastic things that him and his organisation were doing and what they were doing out in New Zealand. And he was only a young guy as well, wasn't he? But he was really kind of so passionate about what his business was trying to do and what the country was trying to do. How do you think that differs compared to what? I mean, obviously it's different, you know, thousands of miles apart. But how do you feel that differs to compared in comparison to what we're trying to achieve in the UK?
I mean, I think we're trying to achieve the same thing, essentially. It was fantastic, the stuff he was telling us that they're doing at a company level. They're doing some... People in the infrastructure sector will get this. Anyone who's not will be like, why are you saying this? But I can tell you they were doing some really interesting things with concrete. And if you work in infrastructure, we know that concrete is a amazing material. It's a massive problem in sustainability. So everyone's always modelling it, looking at new options. But they were doing some really interesting stuff with concrete. But the thing that he told us that was really interesting and different is that in New Zealand, a lot of what they are doing is being legislated and required by New Zealand government. We work in Australia, we don't actually work in New Zealand at the moment, but certainly they were putting down some very strong markers in government saying these are the things we want to see in your supply chain, and a lot of that was around the sustainability agenda, but they were backing it up with support and education and learning. You know, if you can teach people how to do things in a better way that makes them a more profitable company and reduces the negative impact in the world, that's not a tough sell to anyone. If you just put in the requirement and don't tell people how to do it, but they're still under the same pressure to deliver as they were last week, they don't always have the time to stop and figure it out. And especially, you know, in the project world, people have a habit of thinking who are not in that space, why don't they get a project to trial a thing? You know, once you keep adding novel to a project, you're just pushing the risk up all the time. Much better to have proper research and development that trials something for use in projects and then come to us and say, hey, we tried this thing, it really, really works, whether it's a process, a material or a system or an approach. maybe you could try it in your project. And then we're like, yeah, we'll embrace that when we're mid-project and someone goes, hey, we've got new ideas we'd love you to incorporate. My sponsor heart just goes, oh no, new things mid-project, this is not good. You can't be a guinea pig for everything. So there's got to be a bit of a balance, and it really sounded like they were almost like lab testing all of the stuff they were then asking the supply chain to do in infrastructure. It really captured my interest. I'm dying to go out there and find out a bit more about it.
Yeah, are you going to go, because are you going out to Australia again this year?
I'm hoping to go back to Australia this year, and I think if I can fit it in, I'd love to go and meet that chap and his company in New Zealand and just figure it out, because a lot of what we do is we're able to take ideas from one place and take them to other clients and influence them. And it's not always about monetising it, it's about actually being able to say, hey, we saw this thing with our own eyes and we went out and saw a project delivering it in that context and it worked there. Here's how you could modify it and make it work there. Because context and projects do change, so you can't just assume something working somewhere will transfer. So you really need to do that legwork to figure it out, and we do quite a lot of that.
But that's about improvement anyway, isn't it? Because actually you can provide that context to people. Because I always think when I'm talking to people about improvement full stop, it's kind of like if you can give them a real life explanation or, a kind of example of something, then they can get their heads around it. So people who don't understand what change management is or what continuous improvement is, just, you give them an example, right? Okay, these things happen. And then it kind of, I get that now. Yeah,
it's making it real. Like I can stand and talk to people in infrastructure and say, oh, you should make your project sustainable. You should get CEQO, which is an accreditation. You should get BREEAM for your buildings, another accreditation. Great. And Richie talks about in real estate, buildings with a BREEAM assessment are now really profitable. But unless I actually say, okay, one of the ways you can get CEQO and save money in your project and be environmentally friendly is when you are excavating ground to build stuff on it, if you can reuse as much of that material on site and get that takes some environmental licensing to be able to move, material we excavate, we call it overburden. So when you're pulling up overburden and you want to move it around in a big site, you need special licensing so that it's not treated as waste that you're dumping. But these protections are in place for good reason. But if you can use that in such a way on site that you don't have to import new material to fill, that's a cost saving. And that sounds probably fairly basic. 15 years ago, that was seen as being, that'll slow us down in the schedule. We'd rather just excavate, dump it in landfill, pay to bring in the top, fresh, wasn't be topsoil, but pay to bring in fill. But actually now people are saying, well, there's ways of doing this that are really effective and efficient and save money, and they help you get these accreditations. You've got to be able to have those real examples, or you're just giving people theory, and people are busy.
Exactly. And do you know what? I was just thinking, there's a lot of people that I've had on this podcast who actually work in sort of electric vehicle infrastructure, so charge point operators and people like that. And actually, obviously, there's one guy that I've asked, I want to go out on site and see him when he's actually kind of doing all the civil work. But obviously, as part of the civil work, there's got to be some excavation, hasn't there, to actually get all the cabling in. Yeah. So there's got to be, and I know that this guy, one of his colleagues actually is looking at, and there's a couple of companies I've seen that do this, are looking at lower carbon concrete. So it might not be a really exciting conversation, but it's really important because we're talking about offsetting carbon in the first place, aren't we? So if you can do it in major rail projects, I'm assuming that they must be looking at that in kind of smaller kind of projects that, I'm saying smaller, some of them are. If we look at kind of, and I don't know whether you've seen, there's a company called GridServe, and I had a chap from there called Sam Clark, who also is he's one of the directors of EV Cafe, and I had him come on. And GridServe, excuse me, they've got, their idea is to actually have proper forecourts with 22 charging stations on there. Yeah. You're looking at a lot of excavation there, aren't you? So there's got to be a lot of sustainability kind of, being looked at in there, and a lot of kind of looking at making sure that you're reducing the amount of waste when you are excavating, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely. And the EV sector's got that specialist challenge to face, which is everyone assumes that if you just retrofit something, it will have a lower carbon footprint and it will be more sustainable and it will be cheaper than building something new. And that assumption isn't always true. So it isn't always true that if you just modify a few existing spaces, because the guys in the EV cafe and all the people you've been talking to, they know that you don't just turn up and magically an EV charging point has appeared, and magically the underground supply has been there, and magically that also goes back to a DNO somewhere, that magically the national grid created this magic supply. There's a whole load of work in that. And that's the infrastructure that's underground and unseen. People just see the point in the end. A little bit like, railways or subways, whatever we build, people just see the end piece. And of course that's by design. But people assume that actually we'll just modify it, whereas some of the companies are coming out now and actually they're modelling that actually new electric vehicle infrastructure is actually more sustainable because they're not modifying materials in use, so they're creating these bigger forecourts that actually that is a more sustainable intervention than changing 3 over here and there. So yeah, a really interesting journey that they're on, and they're going to come up with some new methodologies and some new ways of working that other parts of the infrastructure sector will be able to adapt, because necessity is the mother of invention, and whether it's at the macro level or the micro level, every time somebody adopts something or invents something that works, eventually the rest of us see it and go, let's have a bit of that, let's try that. So it'll be interesting to see what they drive that moves, and they are such a growing part of the infrastructure sector now. I remember the first rail project that I was asked to put in electric vehicle charging points. Now, we were already designed most of it, so my response again was, oh, what? More change in delivery? And change in delivery is an exponential cost. If you want to know why a project has gone over cost, it is change during delivery. You make your changes in design when it's on paper, not in delivery. The exponential cost is horrendous. But actually that was because we were moving to embrace an electric vehicle culture, and now if you spoke to a sponsor today, you wouldn't even have to tell them it has to go in, because it will be standard scope. They will be saying how many of those points do we need to put in. So again, that's another evolution in infrastructure, because we have to move with the times.
Yeah. Just going back to the project sponsor then. So just for those that don't know what a project sponsor does, and I know you've kind of talked about it earlier, but for example, in the, say maybe in the EV infrastructure sector, where would the importance of a project sponsor be? Where would they, where would they get involved? What would they get involved in?
So I mean, it kind of depends on whereabouts in the organisation they are. You'll probably have sponsors who are overseeing whole rollouts of electric vehicle installation, electric vehicle charging point, installation. You also have people who are sponsoring maybe the fleet change, so where people are moving over to having a whole fleet change to electric vehicles. You'll have sponsors overseeing that. So sponsors only exist where there is change. So where there is significant change, that's where you have sponsors. They sometimes come from the operational world, but they are there to basically drive forward the change that the organisation needs to see, and they are the conduit between the change the organisation needs and the delivery team who are making that change, and then it all coming into use. So they're really the sort of pivotal role in that. So that's you tend to see them in senior places in the organisation, because they tend to report into a board or a CEO or a director, depending on the size of company. And because they oversee all the governance, a big role for a sponsor is project governance and corporate governance. So they will have a link into the board and the finance, legal side of that business, whatever that looks like.
So what happens in those size projects if there isn't a sponsor? I mean, because I suppose I'm thinking, I can hear the benefits, but what's gone wrong due to a lack of sponsorship?
Oh, so that's a really easy one to answer, because I can look at a project portfolio and go, they don't have sponsors. So what happens is all the stuff needs done anyway. So one of two things happens. One is that the stuff is not done. So for example, the corporate governance isn't in place. Therefore, the rules of compliance are broken, or it runs out of funding. So that's the kind of stuff that gets headline news. That's like your Enrons, your Bernie Madoffs, all your big, I won't name a couple of the others because they're too close to home for me, but all the big sort of corporate governance scandals that you get in the project side, you'll see some of that. You'll also see then a lot of the stakeholders will not be managed, so you'll get a lot of political, and that's with a big P and a small p, a lot of political volatility around the project, and that pulls a project in different directions. And what that does is it unsettles the project team, because they are responding to that rather than having a sponsor aligning all of the stakeholders and saying, yeah, I know you'd love to change the scope of what we're doing every week, but that's not viable in a project. I have to protect the benefits and the outcomes. So what you tend to see is some of it doesn't happen, and then you have chaos in and around the project, and sometimes you have projects that actually go on to deliver no benefits whatsoever. And there are a number of projects in the UK and elsewhere. We've got a whole bunch of what we call the beautiful white elephants. They're all built. I mean, these are things that are built, but they deliver no benefits, and certainly not the benefits the funding was based on. Projects run out of funding because the sponsor's role is to make sure that you're aligning everyone to keep the funding flowing. And the other thing that happens is those jobs that need done land on the project team and distract them from the delivery. So every project manager will have an element of stakeholder management they're doing. They can't manage all the stakeholders and technically deliver the project. So on small scale projects that are short and simple and not contentious, that might be viable. It's not when you're doing anything bigger, difficult. And things like EV charging, they have such an interface in our public infrastructure that you're always managing stakeholders. Cars are a contentious thing anyway, and when you start modifying street infrastructure and you're doing new things, always contentious. So basically everyone's life is harder if you don't have an engaged sponsor managing all of that.
It makes total sense to me now that I I know we talked about it, but actually it really makes total sense why you would. So what size project would you get a sponsor in at? What sort of levels of financial kind of levels would you look at? Or is it just you'd get them in when you've got a big project? Or I'm assuming there's no price cap on it, is there? There's no minimum, maximum?
No, there's not really any minimum or maximum, because different sectors differ. So I remember when I first worked in rail, I'd come from urban regeneration, and I had what I felt like was a big portfolio and a big team, and we were managing multiple projects in this portfolio, and it was worth about £1 million. I moved to a project that was like nearly 300 million, and you were like, God. And people would say things like, "Oh, you don't want to move on to a small project after this," And my first solo rail project as a sponsor was kind of 3.25 million. That felt like an enormous sum of money to me, and now I catch myself saying things like, "It's quite a small project, 40, 50 million." Now that's because rail is complex and there's huge risk involved and it's safety critical. Whereas I can work on other projects with organisations where actually their project might be way under £1 million, but they still need a sponsor because of the complexity and the risk they're managing, and their sector doesn't have like a real multiplier on it, which that's because of the technical complexity and the safety. So value is definitely an indicator, but it's not like a hard and fast, if you're spending this much. The thing I say to organisations that approach me, and sometimes they say, should I have a sponsor? And we talk about what they're doing. I'm like, everything you're doing is operational. Everything you're doing is about improving your operations. That is continuous improvement. People you need, not sponsors. Sponsors can help you drive change, but really sponsors are there to drive, big change and help it embed. So they're really not there for the business as usual. They tend to be there for, it's really a project-based activity.
Yeah, and it's just brought me back to the Project Con when you kind of got me talking about, and I was trying to get people to recognise how continuous improvement works with kind of projects, because actually it can be run alongside, like kind of saying where actually you've got a project, but tweaking. There's a as you know, Plan, Do, Check, Act, which is like the basic, the basis of continuous improvement. It's kind of looking at every single section of that project and making sure that it's working. So I've worked in, as you probably know, I worked in telecoms for a little while, and And actually, that was quite interesting, because I wouldn't say they PDCA'd it. They didn't do plan, do, check, act. They just kind of got through it, didn't want any scope creep. Let's carry on. And then at the end, it was like, this wasn't quite working as we expected it to work. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, but if you actually looked at all the sections and made sure that they were working thoroughly, rather than just going, right, let's steam ahead, carry on. No, yeah. It's not quite worked. Oh, now what do we do? You know, that's kind of where continuous improvement works really well. And do you remember, just for everybody, I actually, during this Project Controls Expo, it's just brought it back to me, I got everybody drawing pigs, didn't I?
You did, yeah. People loved the pig exercise. It was, and a lot of those, all of those people are project people, and it was great because you brought the continuous improvement of this is what continuous improvement can do in projects and for you project people. And the pig was hilarious. My pig would definitely have had some problems walking, breathing, existing.
There were a few dodgy pigs in that room. For anybody who works in continuous improvement, it's called the standard pig game, and those who work in CI will have actually used it. But it's literally getting people to draw a pig by actually telling you how to draw it, or kind of just getting you to draw it. But there's different iterations to it. But it was really interesting to see what people came out with, and how I was kind of, you know, and it was good to kind of use it in a projects melding together with continuous improvement. That's how it kind of worked, really, didn't it? So yeah, that was interesting. I really enjoyed doing that. Once I got up and running, I got over my nerves. I was absolutely fine. Especially walking around with a mic.
I struggled to draw the pig, but I felt better when I saw that some of the finest engineers in the world also struggled to draw the pig, and they're design engineers. They were like, "Oh, my pig's gone a bit wrong." So yeah, it was a really good exercise in bringing those two worlds together, because there's so much relevance. There's so much relevance for sponsors applying continuous improvement in what we do. There's just not a lot of sense in employing a sponsor to manage your operations. You know, that for me is the difference, that actually sponsors can use continuous improvement really, really well, but we're not there to continuously improve operations. We're there to bring a continuous improvement approach with a project approach.
And actually it works so well as when we're looking at the sustainability piece. I mean, if we look at what we're trying to achieve by getting to net zero, continuous improvement, and you know, it just works, because actually that's what we're all trying to achieve, and it's continuous improvement is just all about small incremental changes. That's all it is. It's, you don't have to kind of jump forward and go, oh, this is what I want to be now, and you know, it's little things. It's just making those little changes, isn't it? You know, and
yeah, and I think that's viable for people. When we say to people, you know, we have to get to net zero, that is like, I'm a strategy person, so I love the big vision. You know, I love let's build an enormous thing, let's, you know, get to net zero. But I'm also a practical person, so I know the way we're not going to do that is making one giant step, you know, in a project, and we're not going to do it by making one giant step to net zero. I need to know what are the 500 steps that I need to take, that incrementally, when I've taken half of them, I'll be able to look back and go, we've come a long way, we've got halfway to go, oh, we're halfway to the result, or we're at the point. You know, projects aren't always halfway built when you're halfway through, but you want to be able to know at the halfway point, am I at the point where we should be? And that's what I think, like, that continuous improvement towards sustainability and net zero really gives us is, yes, we're not letting go of the big goal, and we're not saying that each individual step on its own will get us there, but the compound effect of those individual steps will get us to those big, scary, rewarding goals. And that totally appeals to my mentality and personality. And people will say something, I worked on a project that everyone told me not to work on. They're like, this will destroy your career, you've got a good reputation, do not touch it, run away, run as far as you can, as fast as you can away from it. I loved how terrifying this project seemed to be, because it did seem buildable, but the challenges around it were actually a lot of sponsor challenges, as in people hate the project, it's technically complex, it's difficult, it's not well supported. Could we build it? Absolutely, we'd just built one. But actually afterwards people were like, were you not scared of like the whole thing? I'm like, no, because I knew it was just a series of little things we had to do one after the other, and not all of them were my things to do, but I knew what my things to do were. And that's a real continuous improvement thing as well, isn't it? Of Is the right person doing the right thing, and does that all add up together? And that's, for me, that's the same thing with thinking about net zero. I can't do what everyone else needs to do, but I can look at what are all the things I need to do in my life and in my business and for my clients, and can I do all of them consistently and keep going? Yeah, absolutely.
I totally agree with you, and that's, like I said, this is why I started the podcast in the first place, because I'm learning. We're all learning. We don't know when we get, we've got 7 years till kind of, for example, kind of petrol and diesel cars get the manufacture stops. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 7 years. There's going to be such amazing innovation. The innovation that's coming through, with so many ideas, amazing ideas that are just. It just blows my mind sometimes, and actually, and I talked to somebody recently about even jobs. For my 17-year-old, he might actually go into a job that isn't even there. It's not even been invented yet. Do you know what I mean? And I just think that we're heading. If lots of people aren't very good with change, are they? But for this, we've got to do something, and like you say, it's got to be. We can all do something. It can be the tiniest thing, or it can be something a bit more substantial. It depends what's in your budget as well, doesn't it? As a person, as a family, not just as a business. Yeah. But I suppose going back to the business thing, businesses need to recognise the sustainability piece is kind of, it's got to be in their pocket. It's got to be something that they're kind of being serious about, hasn't it? In order to kind of achieve what we need to achieve.
Absolutely. If you're in the luxurious position of being able to afford it, that's probably like what we used to think, like sustainability is for people at a certain income. And actually, I think if we're business owners, we have to actually say, well, how's the way we do business contributing to that no longer being a truth and making sustainability unaffordable because it's a norm, because we have a responsibility. That's what comes with being a business owner, responsibility and accountability. And I very much think about that. It's definitely part of our values and thinking, and that's part of the sustainability piece as well, is how are we building these things in a way that's enabling a society around us to not be excluded from sustainable lifestyles because of their income or their socio-economic circumstances.
And how are we've got to be able to recognise that we need to educate people. I'm not saying that in a patronising way or anything like that, but it's about the education piece for everybody, like I say, because people in general might not know that much about net zero and about sustainability, but if we can just start eking it through to them, and like I say, this is how I feel that this, I'm not saying this podcast is the be all and end all. I'm really not, but that's I wanted to feel as I'm learning that I'm also giving back.
Yeah, I definitely get that. Yeah.
That's kind of, I'm not trying to go, everybody should bow down or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying at all. It is just about I feel that this is part of me doing my bit, really.
Yeah, and that's all we can do, is our bit as well as we can and as much as we can, isn't it? That's the reality. Like, we can't sustainability shame people and saying, your burden has to be this. Like, and I'm very much about making that dialogue open and being realistic that for some people it's just not going to be their focus at the moment because they've got other stuff going on. But the rest of us who have got the time, the energy and the resources, we should be doing that work.
Exactly. And do you know what, when you were saying, I nearly went off on a tangent, and I'm good at doing tangents, aren't I? But I nearly went off on a tangent earlier, because when you were saying we're halfway there, I did go back to Bon Jovi at Wembley Stadium, and I was really, really kind of like, thinking, shall I just sing? Because we do tend to talk about music as well when we're on things, but it tends to go off towards the Nolan sisters, doesn't it? But dare I mention
Nolan than Bon Jovi? But the last time I was at Wembley for music was the Stone Roses, so we could go anyway on this podcast.
We could, couldn't we? Oh, Stone Roses, love it. So, right, the final thing I wanted to talk about is that the other thing that you do, and this is how we met, is that you provide training to entrepreneurs who want to get into corporate work. So what, besides kind of getting I want a bit of context to that for people, but that'd be good how you kind of got into that, and just explain a little bit about it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's definitely a sustainability piece for me, and it was a sustainability piece for me when I was inside big organisations. Like, we knew, so creating big infrastructure projects is a socio-economic benefit to society, and one of the things that is really good is that as you're building that infrastructure, you're spending money in the location, you're spending vast sums of money in the location that you're based. And the way that you can make that a good socio-economic investment is by engaging local suppliers. So, for example, like you've heard me say this one about on Borders, you know, we joked about we ate 10,000 bacon rolls one year because 1,000 strong workforce building every day, they consume a lot of food. You know, people are consuming a lot of calories, they're out there doing physical jobs. Now, you're buying those 10,000 bacon rolls in the local shops, so that's an injection in the local supply chain. Look, when we were doing that project, and other projects as well, there was a real push for us to engage small local suppliers into the supply chain, and it was quite difficult because there are some additional barriers to working in rail. So, for example, you have to there's a zero tolerance policy around drugs and alcohol. So, if drugs, and I'm talking about recreational, like classified drugs. If classified drugs are part of your life, then you can't be part of the rail industry. You know, that's a safety feature. You can't come to work drunk. You can't come to work with drugs in your system. Even if you went to Amsterdam 6 months ago, it's just not part of it. So there are things like that. The barrier, the safety barrier, is very, very high. You know, you have to demonstrate your safety culture. So a lot of our work was along trying to encourage people to see what the benefits were, and people who could comply with those rules, how they could get into the system. Really difficult. I noticed then small businesses found it difficult to engage with such big businesses. And if I go forward, you know, quite a number of years, if I say the years, it will give away my age, and that might be a sensitive topic, you know, as a move towards the end of this decade. But a number of years forward, when I started my own business, when I started Sea Change, it never occurred to me not to work with big corporate organisations, because I knew them, I knew how they worked, I knew the amount of money they spent, and I knew they would be my main buyer. But not long after starting that, people started to approach me and say, I can't believe some of the clients you're working with. And at that point, it was me, my laptop, and my knowledge that obviously about some assets and resources, but that's kind of how it started. And people were seeing me work with big clients and saying, how are you doing that? And I would say, well, it's really simple. I just do these few things. And they're like, can you show me how to do that? So it was that thing of, that was an unconscious competence that I had, that I hadn't realised, that I just knew how to work with these big organisations, because I'd been in the procurement, the commercial side, I'd worked in it, lived in it for so long, that it was just kind of how I worked and breathed. And I also started to grow my small business network, because I realised, well, my network in transport's good, my network in infrastructure's good, my network in rail's amazing. And rail is like such a family sort of business, even internationally. But when I started my own business, my peers in that world, that wasn't their lived experience, and I needed to talk to people kind of about what was happening, because my business, as you know, took off really, really quickly. Yes. And growth comes with fear. And I'm a person who loves change. You know, it's in my business name, it's in my DNA, It's in my nervous system now. But I was kind of like, this is happening fast, and I need to think about how I grow the business, like how I make good choices, what do I do, all the stuff you know as a business owner yourself, Liz. Yeah. So I started to create a network of other small business owners, and I would meet people like, not so much like you, because you do work in that sector, but I would meet some people who would work lots with consumers and lots with small businesses, and within a few conversations I would know, oh, they should be selling to some of the same clients as me, like the thing they've got, like. And I would look at what they're charging and be like, you could be charging a lot more for that over with these folk. And they would just have all these barriers around doing it. And it's like, okay, well, I need to help people not do this, because this is part of sustainability, is wealth distribution. Wealth distribution is a huge part of sustainability. And it's a huge factor working against it. So I was kind of like, I have the keys to the door. Why don't I unlock it and show you the way in? And because I could only do it in such a small scale, through my business, I went and spoke to another mentor, a mentor of mine, Lisa Johnson, who I know you've worked with as well, and said to how do I blow the scale of this up, because I'm noticing a lot of people from underrepresented groups who own businesses are not working with these organisations. They're good enough, they're able, and organisations want them. I need to bring the two together, and that's where the business evolved from. And it's been a fantastic experience in seeing people actually go and get those contracts, and actually corporates coming back and saying, this is great, they've got lower overheads, more creativity, they're agile, they can move fast, they can give us what we want. You know, it feels like a virtuous circle to step out of and watch happen. So yeah, that's a long way to tell you that's how that came about.
No, it's brilliant. It is brilliant, and like I say, that's how we met in the first place, isn't it? And through Lisa and through her program. So yeah. But right, let's finish on giving people details of how to find you. So you are a bit like me. You're on quite a lot of the social media platforms, aren't you? Which is the one that you tend to kind of go on the most then if people want to find you?
So you find me on LinkedIn. So if you're in the infrastructure sector, you'll definitely find me on LinkedIn. Easy to find me on there. There's not that many Carol Deveneys. My business is Sea Change International Consulting. If you've got a small business and you're thinking, I was thinking about getting some of those corporate contacts and I need those keys to that door, or even like a skeleton key for all the doors, and then you generally find me on Facebook and Instagram for that. So I'm in the places where the people are. So Facebook and Instagram, you'll find me as my name, or Entrepreneurs Getting Into Corporate. That's the business name.
Wonderful. It's always a pleasure talking to you. We didn't really talk about the Nolans very much at all, did we? So maybe that's for another time. There is a story behind that. That's why I shouldn't be dropping it in when I didn't tell the story. But just to say thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. So I'm going to end on that and say goodbye to everybody. Thanks, Carol, and I shall see everybody later. See you later. Bye. You've been watching Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. Don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell icon, and you'll receive all of our weekly videos. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye.